The yellow plastic pillbox snapped shut on the mahogany table. "Drink it," Travis said. He casually adjusted the pristine white cuffs of his tuxedo, not even bothering to look me in the eye. "I know your body better than you do, Paige." He stepped out into the hallway, and a second later, the heavy metal deadbolt clicked into place from the outside. I walked to the glass window and looked down at the driveway. I watched my 28-year-old cousin, Courtney, slide into the driver's seat of a brand new luxury SUV. Legally, that vehicle was registered with the state as my specialized medical transport. I had never once been allowed to sit inside it. Have you ever had your kindness or your silence weaponized against you by your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Tears are just a symptom of surprise, and tonight, I was entirely out of surprises. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or pound my fists against the locked bedroom door. I simply walked over to the bathroom sink, leaned over the basin, and spit the heavy pink sedative straight down the drain. For 14 years, my Uncle Travis had meticulously convinced the world, and almost convinced me, that I was mentally incompetent. He painted me as a fragile, unstable burden that he generously rescued. Yet, in the ultimate twist of arrogance, he forced me to work 40 hours a week from my locked bedroom as a medical coder, strictly to process his clinic's endless paperwork. He told me it was occupational therapy. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, the reality of my life finally crystallized. He didn't hit me to make me afraid. He didn't have to. He brainwashed me so I would willingly step into the cage and lock it myself. His fake charity was the perfect camouflage. Whenever he fed me table scraps, he told me I was lucky he hadn't thrown me in a state asylum. He wasn't raising a sick niece. He was warehousing a gold mine. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged directly into the clinic's federal billing portal. Tonight, Travis was attending a high society charity gala in downtown Charlotte to accept the Caregiver of the Year award. I pulled up the newly submitted invoices, my eyes scanning the digital ledger. There it was, the smoking gun. Date October 12th. Vendor Elite Catering Services. Amount $15,000. I scrolled over to the payment source. The gala wasn't paid for by the charity board. It was billed directly to my inheritance trust fund. The medical justification code he submitted read, Community Reintegration Therapy. He was using my stolen life savings to buy expensive champagne for billionaires, all while accepting a humanitarian award for keeping me locked in a storage room. My hands were perfectly steady on the keyboard. Emotion is just bad data in an audit, and I was done feeling sorry for myself. I highlighted the document, and I hit print. The printer hummed in the dark, spitting out page after page of my uncle's lies. I didn't stop with the gala catering. If he had opened the door to my trust fund, I was going to tear his entire empire down to the studs. For the next 48 hours, I stopped being the sick, helpless niece. I became the forensic architect of his ruin. Sleep was a luxury I didn't need. Data was my only currency. I bypassed the tears, ignored the manufactured panic he had instilled in me for over a decade, and went straight for the federal billing codes. I pulled up the clinic's invoices from July of last year. Line item 168 hours of continuous in-home care, billed at $200 an hour. Then, I cross-referenced those exact dates with Courtney's public social media feed. During that specific week, Travis and Courtney were posting photos of themselves drinking wine in Tuscany. He had charged my inheritance $33,000 to babysit an empty house while he was on another continent. But the medical files were his real masterpiece. I laid 3 years of my psychological evaluations side by side on my desk. Year 1 diagnosed me with a congenital neurological disorder. Year 2 shifted to severe brain trauma. Year 3 claimed I had acute psychosis. They were three entirely different, medically contradicting diagnoses. But they all shared one fascinating detail. The word symptom was spelled without the letter P in every single report. It was a lazy copy-and-paste job from a phantom doctor who had never even been in the same room as me. I didn't walk downstairs and scream at him. Confrontation just gives the enemy time to prepare. Instead, I compiled every fraudulent ledger, encrypted the entire file, and sent a single text message to Garrett. He was the independent legal notary who had drafted my mother's original trust 14 years ago. The only person who knew what my mother actually wanted. My text simply said, "I have the receipts. It is time." I closed my laptop. The silence in my bedroom didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a staging ground. I walked to the very back of my closet, pushing past the oversized, faded sweatpants Travis always bought me to make me look like a pathetic patient. Hidden in the dark was a sharp, tailored black suit I had bought online 2 years ago, waiting for a day exactly like this. I slipped it on, and for the first time in 14 years, I stood up completely straight. The fabric felt like armor. Travis thought he had locked a victim in this room. He didn't realize he had just locked himself in with an auditor. Garrett and I didn't walk through the grand lobby. We bypassed the red carpet entirely, slipping through the stainless steel service doors of the most expensive hotel in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina. The kitchen staff rushing past with silver trays barely registered our presence. My tailored black suit blended perfectly into the dim shadows of the service corridor. Garrett stood quietly beside me, a thick leather briefcase resting in his hand, holding the original documents my mother had signed over a decade ago. We stepped into the back of the grand ballroom just as the presentation began. The ceiling was dripping with massive crystal chandeliers, casting a warm, golden glow over the city's elite. Waiters in white gloves circled the linen-draped tables, pouring premium champagne. Every single drop of it was paid for by my stolen inheritance. Up on the illuminated stage stood Travis. He held a heavy glass trophy in his left hand and gripped the wooden podium with his right. Right on cue. He paused his speech. He lowered his head, letting a single, perfectly manufactured tear catch the spotlight. He leaned into the microphone, his voice thick with practiced exhaustion. He told the silent, captivated crowd about the crushing financial and emotional burden of caring for a severely disabled relative. He threw out arbitrary numbers, claiming he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars out of his own pocket just to keep me comfortable. He called me his daily cross to bear. The room collectively sighed in profound sympathy. Down in the front row, at the center VIP table, sat Courtney. She had her phone propped up against a tall floral centerpiece, live streaming the entire performance to her thousands of followers. I watched her nod solemnly at the camera, tapping the screen to acknowledge the incoming donations, playing the tragic, devoted cousin to absolute perfection. Catching the bright stage light around her neck was a heavy vintage diamond necklace. It was my late mother's favorite piece. Travis had explicitly told me he pawned it 6 years ago to cover my emergency medical transport. Arrogance is a massive liability in any audit. Travis genuinely believed his carefully constructed ledger of lies was completely impenetrable. He was utterly convinced that the niece who supposedly lacked the mental capacity to read a basic bank statement was currently lying on a cot, heavily sedated behind a deadbolted door. He had spent 14 years writing off my miserable existence as a profitable tax deduction. He had no idea the financial detonator to his entire empire was standing 30 feet away, calmly waiting for his applause to finish. The last echo of applause faded into the high ceiling of the ballroom. I didn't wait for the silence to settle. I stepped out from the shadows near the service doors and walked into the light. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor. One step, then another. Time seemed to dilate, slowing to an agonizing crawl. Every head in the room turned. I watched the triumphant, weeping smile on Travis's face freeze in real time, and then slowly shatter. I didn't yell. I didn't run. I walked straight up the center aisle, directly into the glaring stage spotlight, and stepped right up to the mahogany podium. I adjusted the microphone. The sharp screech of audio feedback made a few billionaires in the front row wince. "Everyone in this room is clapping for my uncle's boundless generosity," I said. My voice was as cold and precise as a federal audit. "But the vintage champagne you are drinking right now was paid for by my inheritance." I opened the thick folder. I didn't summarize my trauma, and I didn't ask for their pity. I simply laid out the liabilities. I dropped the stack of printed medical coding receipts onto the podium. The stark, black and white ink of the paper felt like a heavy anchor against the glittering, expensive reflection of the crystal chandeliers overhead. Invoice number 409. I read into the microphone, the sound bouncing off the walls. $15,000 for elite catering services, billed directly to my trust fund under the Medical Code for Community Reintegration Therapy. You aren't attending a charity gala tonight. You are dining on my medical fraud. The silence in the ballroom became absolute. The kind of heavy, suffocating quiet where you could actually hear the ice melting in the water glasses. I turned my head and looked directly down at the VIP table. Courtney sat entirely frozen, her phone still propped up against the floral centerpiece, live streaming the absolute disaster to thousands of her followers. "And for anyone tuning into my cousin's tragic broadcast," I continued, pointing straight at her, "the luxury SUV parked out front with her name on the valet tag is legally registered with the state as my specialized disability transport. I have never once been allowed to sit inside it." Courtney gasped. Her hand flew to her throat, her fingers instinctively brushing against the heavy vintage diamonds resting on her collarbone. "That necklace," I said, my tone completely flat. "Travis told me he pawned those diamonds 6 years ago to cover my emergency medical bills. It belonged to my late mother. Now it is just another accessory for an accomplice." Travis gripped the edge of the podium. The benevolent, weeping caregiver was gone. His face flushed a deep, violent purple. Raw, unhinged panic bled into his eyes. He realized, in front of the most powerful people in Charlotte, that his most profitable asset had just liquidated his reputation. He was completely ruined. Travis didn't just lose his composure, he completely unraveled in front of a room full of millionaires. His face flushed a violent shade of purple, and he desperately waved his hand toward the back of the ballroom. "Security!" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Get her out of here immediately. She is having a severe psychotic break." 2 hotel guards hesitated near the service doors, clearly unsure if they should interrupt a high-society family dispute that suddenly involved federal billing fraud. Realizing physical force wasn't coming fast enough, Travis tried to reclaim his absolute authority. He reached into his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulled out a sharply folded piece of thick paper. He held it up in the stage lights like a shield. A sickening, arrogant smirk crept back onto his face. He looked out at the silent crowd, and then directly at me. "You are too late, Paige," he announced, projecting his voice to regain control of the room. "I have a signed medical power of attorney. Just this morning, I legally transferred every single cent of your assets into an irrevocable trust. It is entirely untouchable. You have absolutely nothing." I didn't flinch. I didn't even try to reach for the paper. I just looked at it the way a senior auditor looks at a careless typo. Travis thought he was executing a brilliant legal maneuver, but he forgot that I had spent 40 hours a week processing his medical paperwork. You always were sloppy. Travis, I said smoothly into the microphone. Hold that paper up a little higher. Let everyone see the letterhead. He hesitated, his smirk instantly faltering. That is the old clinic logo, I stated, my voice echoing through the dead silence of the ballroom. You retired that design 4 years ago. I know, because I processed the invoice for the new graphic designer. I took a single step closer to him. The sweat was visibly beading on his forehead under the bright lights. But it gets worse, I continued, slowing my words down so every single syllable landed perfectly. The notary stamp at the bottom of that page expired 2 years ago. The witnessing physician who supposedly watched me sign this document passed away 8 months ago. And the date you chose to forge next to my name. The digital logs show I was actively working in the federal medical coding system from my locked bedroom, exactly 50 miles away from that notary office. The collective gasp from the VIP tables was deafening. I had just dismantled his grand, untouchable trust with 4 basic clerical errors. Down at the center table, Courtney finally realized the ship was rapidly sinking. She scrambled to save herself. She yanked her phone from the floral centerpiece, tapped the screen, and cranked the volume to the maximum. An audio recording of Travis's voice blared out across the quiet room. Just label the bank transfers as specialized therapy. Travis's recorded voice echoed from the small speaker. No one is ever going to ask questions about a crazy girl. Courtney stood up, tears streaming down her carefully contoured face. He made me do it, she cried out to the crowd, pointing a shaking finger at her own father. He manipulated me, too. I didn't know how bad it was. I looked down at her. My compassion was a luxury they had overdrafted for over a decade. I pulled my own phone from my pocket, tapped open my encrypted files, and read aloud a text message she had sent to Travis 3 years ago. Keep her heavily medicated, I read, my voice completely devoid of any pity. She is the only investment we have that is still paying out. Courtney's mouth dropped open. She collapsed back into her chair, clutching the stolen diamond necklace, entirely silenced. The trap hadn't just snapped shut, it had completely crushed them. Garrett didn't even raise his voice. He simply opened his leather briefcase and handed a single, notarized injunction to the charity board president, officially freezing the irrevocable trust on the grounds of fraudulent transfer. The local authorities standing by the service doors didn't need much convincing after hearing the audio recording. I watched the police escort Travis and Courtney straight down the center aisle, past the glittering crystal chandeliers, and out into the cold night. They walked out with absolutely nothing, not their carefully crafted reputations, not their freedom, and certainly not my money. Within 48 hours, a federal judge forcibly reversed every single stolen cent back into my sole control. $1,500,000. I packed my things and moved out of that claustrophobic storage closet the exact same week. I never went back. Now, I lease a beautiful, open-concept apartment right in the heart of downtown Charlotte. This morning, I walked out of the glass lobby doors and stepped into the warm, early sunlight. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the yellow plastic pill box Travis used to slide across the mahogany table every single night. I didn't open it. I didn't think about the decades of stolen time. I just dropped it into a heavy iron trash can on the sidewalk. That was the last physical tie to my captivity, and I didn't even look back as it hit the bottom. I walked down the block and sat at a quiet outdoor cafe. The waitress brought me a fresh cup of premium dark roast coffee. I sat there in the sun, holding the warm ceramic mug with both hands, and just listened to the morning sounds of the city. There were no forced sedatives, There was no medical gaslighting. There was no one standing over me, telling me I was an incompetent burden. For the first time in 14 years, there was only profound, unbreakable peace. Sometimes the people who claim to be protecting you are just guarding a gold mine. If you have ever had to burn a toxic bridge to protect your peace, you know exactly how heavy that door is to close. Drop a 100 in the comments below if you would have burned their lies to the ground too, and subscribe for more stories of ultimate karma.